Welcome back to Face the Nation. We are now joined by Minnesota Senator and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar. She joins us from Boston. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning, Margaret.
You've said before on this program that you agree with the premise of challenging China, but you do it with allies and you wouldn't use tariffs. How exactly would you get them to the negotiating table?
Well, right now you have complete chaos, Margaret, and you can use tariffs, but not the way this president has been using tariffs. He's been using them like a meat cleaver, or maybe the better word is a tweet cleaver. And when you look at what he's done, just on August 1st, he announced 300 billion goods, more tariffs. Then on August 13th, they reversed it. Then on August 20th, they said they were going to do taxes because of the fears of recession. They were going to reduce taxes, which of course would only add more to the debt that he's created. And then the next day, they reversed that. And I think one common adage when you deal with the rest of the world and you want to have credibility for our great country is that you keep your promises and you keep your threats. And what he does is he makes these blustering threats, like kicking all of our companies out of China, that people don't think really he's going to follow through on. So what I would do is go back to the negotiating table with our allies, examine these tariffs. Some of them can come off, some of them could stay on, and then make sure that we're using trade enforcement. I had my own experience with this to keep Minnesota iron ore mines open because of Chinese steel dumping. And at the end of the Obama administration, we called for and passed some laws, got more enforcement going, and they opened up again. That is not the careful, targeted approach that this president is doing. And as a result, you've got soybeans sitting in bins in Iowa. You've got pork down to its lowest export levels in 9 years. This is starting to hurt everyday Americans because of the chaos that he's created.
Democrats are running on this message that the economy isn't working for everyone. But in this latest CBS News poll, we see the majority of people say the economy is good, and they approve of President Trump's handling of it. Are Democrats out of step?
We're not out of step, and I just know the people that I talk to. They know the economy is stable, and we've come out of the downturn because of the hard work and resilience of our workers and our businesses. But what a true leader does, there's an old Ojibwe saying that a true leader makes decisions not for this generation, but for 7 generations from now. This president can't keep his decision for 7 minutes from now. What a true leader does is says, what are these challenges? What do I see on the horizon? We know that we've got to do something long-term about this debt, and he just keeps adding to it. We know we have to help people afford things like their pharmaceuticals, and he has done nothing. He's made a bunch of promises. I would take them on. It's this whole constellation of things where it's just too expensive for people to participate in this economy. And then the third thing that we need to do is to simply go back to the negotiating table when it comes to the trade war that he's created, and then make sure that we are doing something about this debt in the long term. And that's why I've opposed so many of his policies. Even if you just took these corporate tax giveaways, what he's done in that last tax bill, you could have so much more money to invest in people's everyday lives and infrastructure.
I want to ask you about Afghanistan. As commander-in-chief, you told the New York Times in your first year you would no longer have troops in that country. Senator Lindsey Graham is warning you go to zero. That's reckless. That risks having the country collapse into the hands of terrorists. So how do you balance that?
I look at it this way. We have people that now are deploying that weren't even born when we got into Afghanistan. So a lot of this is negotiating. This president, because of the chaos that he's created on the foreign stage, makes it so our allies don't always trust him. But that doesn't mean that you don't go back to the negotiating table and you try to negotiate. I think you've got to make sure that when you're dealing with the Taliban, that you know exactly what they're up to, what's going to happen. You want to make sure a lot of the gains we made with women in government and the democracy gains that we made in Afghanistan stay the same. But yes, I think we need to start bringing our troops home.
Does any footprint need to stay?
you could always have training footprints and people working there ready to go if there is a complete upsurge. But I think that you have to make sure that this country can function on their own. And my concern right now is that if this president just keeps going back and forth on this, once again, they'll never step up. That's been the past with Afghanistan.
We saw 3 2020 candidates drop out recently. Seth Moulton, one of them, told The Times, "I think it's evident this is now a three-way race between Biden, Warren, and Sanders, and it's a debate about how far left the party should go." Do you feel those same pressures?
No, I don't feel them at all because I've just made the debates for the fall. It's like making the playoffs, and it is a long haul. A number of our presidents that ended up being our presidents were in single digits at this point in the summer, and that's because I have a different kind of campaign. I am running a grassroots campaign. We have great teams in New Hampshire and in Iowa, and we're gaining support and endorsements all the time.
Lastly, on immigration, the White House said this week that they want to change the Flores Agreement, which would allow them to detain indefinitely migrant families, but do it holding them together. The Obama administration also tried to get out from under the Flores Agreement. Where do you stand on this?
This will end up in court, and my guess is that it'll be thrown out because of the way this administration has handled immigration. But I think the bigger issue here, Margaret, is that if he really wanted to do something about this, he'd pass comprehensive immigration reform, which would be better for our economy instead of using these immigrants as pawns.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. We'll be right back with Josh Bolten of the Business Roundtable. We're now joined by Joshua Bolten. He is the president and CEO of the Business Roundtable, a lobbying group that represents nearly 200 of the world's largest companies. Many here in Washington also remember him as former White House Chief of Staff to George W. Bush. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you just heard the president's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, say that the president does have the authority, though he's not using it right now, to essentially stop private investment in China. What do corporations think when they hear that?
They get worried. With that, we don't need to go into the details of what authorities the president has, but he has a lot of authority through the national security statutes to disrupt trade and commerce in a way that would cause huge damage, not just to the Chinese economy, but to the global economy and the U.S. economy. So American CEOs are concerned about the escalating tit-for-tat trade war with China.
And you saw some of that reflected in that sell-off that we saw in the financial markets on Friday, and some concern about what's going to be happening in the global economy. We're hearing from American companies that they're worried about investing because they just don't know what's around the corner. And the White House is saying, trust us on this. Is that enough to invest on? How do corporations plan around that?
No, they can't plan around that. I mean, look, it's a difficult situation because the CEOs of the Business Roundtable have been very supportive of a lot of the objectives that the administration has been pursuing in their negotiation with the Chinese. There need to be structural reforms to get rid of intellectual property theft, to open their markets to more investment, to open their markets to more U.S. products, to stop forced technology transfer, to stop subsidies to targeted industries. And all of those things are very important to have happen. But if this trade war spirals out of control, the damage is huge. I have a lot of respect for Larry Kudlow, but he's just not reflecting the views of American business when he says this is all fine. A lot of American businesses now have their foot poised above, right on top of the brake, and they're tapping the brake periodically. What we saw on Friday with the stock market was the markets tapping the brake lightly. But if this spirals out of control, the risk is that everybody's going to slam on the brake, and that would be a disaster, not just for the Chinese, but for the United States as well.
What is that tipping point?
We don't know where the tipping point is, but the current situation is sounding very risky. Here's what was most concerning about the president's tweet. yesterday, which was he's clearly trying to ratchet up the pressure on the Chinese to make the kinds of accommodations we want in the trade negotiations. Business community supports that. But the president's tweet also implied that he thinks it would be either benign or maybe even helpful for the United States to decouple completely from the Chinese economy. That would be a disaster, not just for the Chinese, for the global economy, and for the United States.
This is the world's second largest economy and a
The
huge
world's
business.
second largest economy and the biggest market for U.S. and everybody else's products, and a gateway to the rest of Asia for U.S. exporters. So it is not benign and certainly not helpful to contemplate a complete decoupling from the Chinese. We need to resolve the trade situation. And until we do, American businesses' foot is going to be poised over the brake pedal, tapping it periodically and hopefully not slamming on the brakes.
You hear support for the premise, not for the tactics, from a lot of Republicans, but you also hear, though, a response in some ways that this is a necessary amount of pain. You also hear out there on the campaign trail a lot of complaints, particularly from Democratic candidates, that corporations have been essentially getting the best of American workers for years. President Trump, when he campaigned, essentially said the same thing. This week, your organization made a change, saying that your sort of premise for the responsibility of corporations is not first to profits and shareholders, but essentially to their employees. Is this a response to these political pressures?
No, it's not a response to the political pressures, but it's a recognition of 182 of our CEOs of some of them America's biggest companies that it's the right thing to do. You know, for Margaret, for 20 years, the Business Roundtable has had a policy statement that said the principal purpose of a corporation is to benefit its shareholders. And what those 182 CEOs of the Roundtable did this past week is issued a statement withdrawing that previous policy statement and saying, no, the purpose of a corporation is to serve all of its stakeholders, its customers, its employees, its communities, and its shareholders.
And that means higher wages. That means
it does in
more
some,
benefits.
Absolutely does in some cases. Many of our companies have already raised their minimum wages, and for the first time, the Business Roundtable supports an increase in the minimum wage. But it means taking care of all of your stakeholders, because in the very long run, you can't take care of your shareholders unless you've taken care of your customers, employees, and communities as well.
As a Republican, as someone who ran the OMB, do you believe still that deficits matter when you see numbers like you saw this week?
Yeah, deficits absolutely matter. Now, they have not so far mattered as much as most economists or budget directors would have predicted, but they definitely do matter. But I agree with Senator Graham when he says that the way to attack this problem is to go after the real drivers of the unsustainable costs in our budget, which is our entitlement programs. You cannot balance this budget by shrinking the economy with higher taxes, and you cannot balance the budget by focusing just on the discretionary spending, which is really a relatively small part of the problem.
Josh Bolten, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back in a moment.
How are things going for you financially?
They could be better. Yeah, they could be better.
Everybody I know is working. It seems pretty easy to get a job.
I have some issues with President Trump's approach on trade. I don't think tariffs work.
I'm so upset by the fact that we're losing ground, and our allies don't even like us. Nobody likes us. And you know what? I get it. I totally get it.
For some political analysis, we turn now to our panel. Michael Graham is politics editor at Inside Sources and also a contributor on our digital network, CBSN. Joshua Johnson is the host of NPR's 1A, and Ann Gearan is a White House correspondent for The Washington Post. Good to have you all here.
Good to be here.
And does the White House have a clear message to calm the concerns?
No.
And we saw that play out in dramatic fashion all week, where Trump would say one thing in the morning, something else in the afternoon, and then by 7 o'clock, we had 3 aides on the driveway or on television cleaning it up. It has continued in France, where he appeared today to say he had second thoughts about the tariff war with China, only to have aides go out and say that isn't what he meant at all. So no, there's no clear message.
But when you look at the polling that we're seeing here, Michael, it says the majority of Americans do think things are going okay with the economy.
And I think Larry Kudlow tried to make the case that if you look at the economy broadly, still doing well. The polling you had from CBS News shows that it's still there. My question is, what does a successful economy do to voter behavior? If you really believe that the economy is so good that it can survive the craziness of Trump, then it's so good it can survive no Trump. And it frees voters who don't like Trump but really like the economy, that 53%, to say, you know what? I don't have to take the craziness. This economy is so strong, I can afford to vote against my economic means. And you're absolutely right. The era of it's the economy stupid is over.
Joshua, 45% of those polled say they definitely probably vote for Trump. So as you were just laying out there, a strong economy, it's not decisive in the way it used to be. Is the bottom line just people can't see beyond their party anymore?
I don't know if it's that. I think also if you look at that poll, if you combine the people who say they will and the people who say they won't, and then the people who say they won't vote within the margin of error, it could go either way. That's what I take from the poll. I don't know that we know what to make of the economy yet. There are all these different indicators that Larry Kudlow throws out. He did it this week. He did it last week in another Sunday morning interview. So there's all of this kind of there's all these facts and figures flying around. Then you have your own personal fortune. You think, well, I can still pay my bills. I can still gas the car up. I'm still going to work. My paycheck hasn't dropped. My health insurance hasn't gotten that much more expensive. Maybe I'm okay. Then you've got all these other economic things going on around the world. You've got Britain now dealing with Brexit. Prime Minister Boris Johnson told the BBC this morning that it's looking touch and go in terms of having a deal, and that now the ball is in the EU's court, and the main thing is to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. So the world is more complicated. Then you've got President Xi, who's not thinking about the end of his administration. He's thinking about the end of his life. Xi Jinping will be the president of China until the day he dies. And in the middle, you have Americans who are trying to figure out, who am I going to vote for, either in the primaries or in the general. I think it's going to come down to when people start canceling their Netflix subscriptions. I mean, when it comes down to the creature comforts that we have, to feeling that day-to-day life has changed, we're not there yet. So I totally understand why people are kind of, well, maybe I like the economy. I'm not sure I like the fact that he tweets so much, but everything seems to be okay. We can't know yet. There's too much going on, and nothing rises to the top.
And the other uncertainty is just what's happening in the world. We saw some breaking headlines that Iran's top diplomat, Javad Zarif, has made this surprise visit to the G7. What is he there for? Is he meeting with President Trump?
We don't know the answer to that. It appears that one of two things is happening. Either the French president who's hosting this meeting, Emmanuel Macron, has some kind of side plan for Zarif to speak with other diplomats there. This may or may not include Trump, and which brings up the other possibility, which is that if that advanced planning does not include Trump, and we had not heard a word about it until an hour ago, that means that Macron is sandbagging Trump. And so stay tuned.
Stay tuned. We'll see, to quote the president, as he said. But this uncertainty, is there a political cost to the geopolitical, to the economic, to the financial uncertainty?
Obviously, it affects the world. And I think it's fascinating. Do you know who the most popular back home at the G7 summit leaders is? Anyone? Well, no, it's not Trump. That was the trick question. It's actually Shinzo Abe, but Trump is number 2. He's the second most popular person at home, not because he's obviously popular, but because people are so unpopular. There's so much turmoil and change going on at home. Imagine what it does to the global economy if there's a hard out of Brexit. We don't even know what that is going to look like. And I think Trump's theory is turmoil helps me. I'm the candidate of turmoil. more turmoil. That's my team, and that energizes my people, and that's why he's more popular with the leaders of Warsaw, of Poland and Romania than he is with England and France.
Although we should be careful, and I hear what you're saying, but I think for the voters who put Donald Trump in office, what some would call turmoil, they would call a shakeup. I mean, this is why Donald Trump got elected, is because there were millions of Americans who said, you don't see me? Fine. I'm going to punch you in the throat and make you pay attention, and I'm going to elect somebody who's going to do it for me for 4 years. So the voters who are getting what they want now, even those who see their economic fortune shaky but still believe in Donald Trump's vision for the country, there's a risk, I think, politically, for Democrats and even for some Republicans. We heard Joe Walsh is now going to run for the Republican nomination this year, telling those voters, you know what, now we need to fix this. We need to put the right person in office. You're really going to tell tens of millions of Americans that I'm what's wrong with the country because I put the wrong president in office and he's doing what I want him to do just because you don't like him in the media and the press and inside the Beltway? Are you supposed to make me feel like I'm the problem now? I'm looking forward to seeing when the American people start to feel what's going on and how that plays out with the voters who put Donald Trump in office, and whether any other candidate can pull them over without shaming them for what they've put the country through and for what they've sent the country into. I'm not sure anyone's ready to do that yet.
And the president, though, is feeling some pressure. He's been tweeting and talking at length about what's happening with China, and he's blaming the Fed chair for a good part of it.
He blames China, he blames the Fed chair, he blames Germany, and he blames the media for misinterpreting him. Sometimes that order gets mixed up, but those are the main scapegoats. He clearly is feeling pressure. I think all indications are, and our reporting shows, that he does firmly believe in the power of tariffs and thinks that he can wait out China. The problem is that China thinks that China can wait out Trump. And yes, the U.S. economy is larger and stronger. Yes, Trump has a lot of cards that he can play, but he doesn't have a command economy the way China does. He doesn't have the state control that China does, where they could just demand that they wait him out.
We will stay tuned. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we will be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.